Okay, everybody, we're going to get started. Welcome to today's webinar. This is our webinar for October. Today's webinar is going to look at Mozy for servers. For those who haven't joined previously, the format and the way we go about these webinars is that I do a brief 15 minutes or so, maybe 10 minutes or so of a presentation. And then I'll do a walkthrough of the stuff we've covered in the presentation, just so you can see it in action. And then finally, I'll open up the remaining time to a Q&A session for any questions that you may have on today's topic, which is Mozy for servers. If you do have other questions around the Mozy product, but are not directly related to Mozy servers, I will ask that if you do ask them, I will look to answer the questions on today's webinar first before I get to those questions. So just to give you a quick introduction to myself, my own name is Niall Fahy. I'm the Tech Education Coordinator here at Mozy, so I look after all the internal and external trainings for our support staff and all those technical trainings that go with that around our products and our services. I'm with Mozy now, it's about 6 years. I started in tech support and I've now moved into this role. So today's session, what does Mozy for servers cover? So we'll be looking at backup sets. We'll be looking at what backup sets entail and how they work. We'll look at VSS backup sets specifically, what those are, how they are used, and the advantages of using those if backing up certain files and folders. And then we'll look at network shares. Can I use them? How do I use them? And what way do I add them to my backup sets? So just some definitions on today, just so you're clear when I'm mentioning them. We're looking at server type users here today. So that is any user who is set up in the admin console as a server user. So server users can be anybody on a server operating system or a desktop operating system. Obviously, the server type user is intended for a server operating system, but it can be used on a desktop operating system. You will maybe familiar with the other user type we have within the Mozy software is a desktop user type. This user is only able to use or back up a desktop operating system. Whereas if you're set up as a server type user, you can actually back up a desktop operating system as well as obviously a server operating system. Our focus here today obviously is primarily on the server type user, and the information we're going through here is targeted towards server users, as is the walkthrough that we'll go through in a moment. So looking at backup sets first. So how can backup sets help me? So the advantage of backup sets obviously is that you can group specific files together. So you can select a search location, create a couple of rules that are looking for particular file types or files created on a specific date or files in specific locations, and you can group all them into one backup set. The advantage there is that because you're selecting a search location with rules that back it up about particular file types or date of creation and stuff like that, it means that any additional files that match that rule will actually be automatically added into your next backup. So it goes to our traditional method of our mantra of set and forget backups, whereby you select your files once and anything that you want additionally to be added in would, if they match those backup sets, would get picked up without you having to go back into the settings window and actually add them. So that's one advantage you can get from using backup sets. Obviously, you can create exclusionary rules and inclusionary rules. Your inclusionary rules will be based around what type of backup sets you want to create, what types of files you want to put into that backup set. And exclusionary rules can be useful if there's particular file types or particular locations or particular creation times that you don't want, or modified times that you don't want files from those periods backed up. So a good example would be if you had, say, .txt files. They are all small files, maybe 4 or 5 kilobytes, and you don't really need them. So you don't want to include them in your backup sets or in your backup. You can actually create an exclusionary rule for those type of files and do it by the actual size of the file. So we'll look at that in the walkthrough and how to create an inclusionary backup set and how to create an exclusionary backup set. So we have our standardized backup sets that we create in Mozy. So we look at the common areas that people would back up files from, and we've created a couple of those common backup sets. Things like PowerPoint presentations, things like Excel, other things like word processing documents, your My Documents section, and so forth like that. Outside of that, you have what's known as VSS backup sets. These are backup sets that are created by the system itself. And when Mozy is installed and it does its initial file scanning, it picks up that these VSS backup sets are available. So what exactly is a VSS backup set? So VSS is a Microsoft service that allows you to take a snapshot and back up files that may be opened when we attempt to back them up. So that's normal. On a normal Windows machine, you may have, on your desktop machine, you may be using 1 or 2 files when you run a backup. And that's no problem. We can use the actual VSS service that's pre-installed on all Windows operating systems to back up those files, because it's only 1 or 2 and there's not a lot of changes happening when the backup kicks off, so it can take a snapshot and there's no rush to it. Where you're backing up though on a server system, generally on a server operating system, you may be backing up databases or Exchange, Active Directory, SQL, things like along those lines. And those databases, they I suppose take up more space, obviously, but also the transactions and the interactions that are happening on those systems happen an awful lot faster. So, for example, it wouldn't be realistic for us to say to somebody, oh, your backup's going to start now. Can you turn off Exchange? Can you shut down Exchange and stop everybody in the company using their emails for the next 20 minutes or so while we run a backup? That's not feasible. So what we do is we tap into this VSS service to take a snapshot of your Exchange database. Now, there's 2 reasons, obviously, to use VSS backup sets. The first is that, obviously, for the backup purposes, it makes it easier for your system to back up your Exchange or your Active Directory or your SQL. The second point is that it makes it an awful lot easier for you to restore your Exchange, Active Directory or SQL database. The reasoning that is that these databases themselves have a restore wizard inbuilt in them that looks to import VSS backup sets. So take it to the next step, and apologies if this gets a bit technical, but with VSS backup sets, what you're actually backing up is database files. So let's take Exchange as our example. Okay, you can select the VSS backup set for Exchange, or you could select the Exchange folder in the File System tab. Now, if you select the Exchange folder in the File System tab, what happens there is the default system writer tries to take the snapshots for the Exchange server. Now, why does that become a problem? Well, I'll tell you. When the Exchange server goes through transactions, So if you send an email, receive an email, delete an email, move an email from a folder to folder, they're all transactions in the Exchange server. So all of those need to be tracked. So there's an entry made for each one of those, and that entry goes into an Exchange temporary log. Okay, and that temporary log can get to generally a maximum size of 1 megabyte or 5 megabytes. That is determined by your actual Exchange administrator. But the maximum is 5 megabytes, but typically it can be 1 megabyte sometimes. So what happens is those transactions go through and they're logged into this temporary log file. When that temporary log file is full, what happens is it empties that temporary log file into a permanent log file. Now, because those transactions, and generally with an Exchange server, you're probably looking at thousands of transactions every few seconds as multiple people in the organization use Exchange. What happens then is that obviously, because we're using the default snapshot provider when we're selecting it from the file system tab, it's not able to keep up with all those transactions, and it'll return an error sometimes. So that becomes a problem there. The advantage of VSS Backup Sets, on the other hand, is that they contain 6 or 7 databases that are, when you go to take a snapshot of Exchange, what it does is it takes all those transaction log files that have been created and it purges them and basically transfers them into these database files. We back up these database files and store them securely on our end, and then when you want to do a restore, we restore these database files to your system, which you can then use your Exchange that's on your new system to actually use the restore wizard in that to actually import these database files. So with the VSS Backup Set, you have a system where it's using its own created snapshot provider to be able to make those snapshots a lot easier. It's the snapshot provider that works with the VSS Backup Set is designed to work with, there's a specific one created and designed to work with Exchange. Active Directory has its own snapshot service, and so does SQL. Whereas when you use the file system tab, which sometimes people use traditionally, when they go in and they select the Exchange folder in the file system tab, that's going to use the default system service writer, which is generally only designed to work with maybe 2 or 3 smaller files changing, and not at the pace that something like Active Directory or SQL or Exchange would work at. So for backup, that's one of the big reasons we pushed using VSS Backup Sets if you're backing up any of those databases mentioned there. And then for restore, it just makes it an awful lot easier for you, because, as I said, Exchange, Active Directory, and SQL all have their own restore wizards that actually look to use VSS backups. And for anybody who's had the unfortunate scenario where they've had to restore an Exchange server using transaction log files, they'll tell you that is a long, tedious process where you have to be sure that you have every single individual transaction log file to rebuild your Exchange server. So the other additional option you have with the server type user or backing up a server operating system is the ability to use network shares. Okay, so you can use network shares. You can add them to your backups. Your 3 components that you'll be required to input is the location or the path of the network share, and if you have a username and password for that network share, then you'd obviously need that information also to input. So the path or location will look something similar to this. It generally is // server name and then / the name of the share, or alternatively it's // input the IP address and then /share. The username that will be required to add a network share, if you have one, will generally follow the formats that you see on screen there, either domain, hostname, or IP address /username. And just before we go into the demonstration, in terms of network shares, just one or two other small things in relation to network shares. Because VSS takes snapshots of files on its own drive, it can't work over a network share. So basically, if you select files on a network share to back up in your backups, then if those files are opened during a backup, they won't be able to be snapshot, because that is an external drive and VSS can't work over a network share like that. So what will happen is those files will be skipped in that particular backup, and they'll be added to the next backup for backup. Okay, so I'm just going to walk through some of the features we've talked about there, just so you can see it on the screen, and then we'll open it up to any questions that you might have. So I'm just going to jump in here to the screen here. I hope everybody can see it. So what you see here obviously is your backup sets window. You may be familiar with it. If not, as I was mentioning a while ago, these are the default backup sets that we have. Okay, see these here, common enough in the configuration window, and these are common backup sets or common files and folders that people will generally choose to back up. To add a new backup set, you just right click in the white space and add backup set. It'll open up a separate window here. Then all you need to do for yourself is to actually name the backup set. So if we call this one webinar, we call it webinar 1. We'll select our search location here. So I want it to be my user, so I'm going to select my user. Or if I wanted it to, I could select my entire C drive. What I will do then is add a rule. So I can include, and then file type, size of file, the last modified date, when it was created, the file name or the folder name. With the last modified or the created, I can actually select before, after, or between. So if I go between, I can select the dates that I want to look for that rule. So what I'm going to do is, as we mentioned there a while ago, if I had a couple of hundred particular files that I had, small files, and I wanted to include them in here, say we'll say txt. Okay, and I only want the txts in here that are 5 kilobytes or less. Okay, so if I hit OK there, so what's going to happen here now is that it's going to search my C drive, and it's going to search for any txt files that are less than 5 kilobytes. Now I do have the option here as well of selecting OR. So if I wanted, I could say I want all txt files or files that are less than 5 kilobytes. It would be two different things. Whereas in this scenario, what I'm saying is I want the txt files, but only the txt files under 5 kilobytes. When I hit OK, it'll scan the files as you see down the bottom left here. And what it does there then is it's scanning my entire C drive, and it's looking to impose the rules that I've selected there in the backup set window. While that's scanning and looking to add, okay, because it's a virtual machine, it may take a second or two for it to do that. I'm just going to point out the VSS backup sets that we were mentioning a while ago, and you'll notice them here that they have this VSS in front of them. So you see the parentheses, VSS parentheses. As you notice, is these are not created by Mozy. As I mentioned a while ago, what happens is when we install on a server operating system or on a desktop operating system, we will scan the system to see if there's any VSS backup sets there. So on this machine, I don't have Exchange, or I don't have Active Directory or anything like that. But I have the standard VSS stuff that's on every machine. So your COM+ stuff and your system registry. If I was to have Exchange, then it would actually create the the backup set, and it would just be parentheses VSS parentheses exchange. And in there you can see it has a couple of folders, and there's a database file there in that one for my system registry, and a few text files. What you'll see typically with an exchange database is that you'll see about more often than not about 4 to 5, maybe 6 database files within here. Okay, for VSS backup sets. With the rule we've created there, we can see now that we have 2.9 megabytes size-wise of files. We have nearly 1100, just over 1100 actual files in the backup set. So if I select that there, I can come in here and I can see all the files that are selected. Okay. So you notice here a lot of these are Windows help files. So if I didn't want to be backing them up, I could just select, create a rule like this, where I'd put them all into the container, edit the backup set, and select this option here. What that does, you'll notice that the backup set now has gone red. That now has excluded those files from backup. So that means that those files are not selected in this backup set, but they also can't be selected in the file system tab, and they can't be selected in the backup sets, in any of the backup sets. They'll be shown. So if I go into the word processing documents here and scroll down, okay, they're here. So PDFs, I don't have PDFs selected. So you notice here that they can't be selected either. So it's not just in the backup set here that they can't be selected, but they can't be selected on other aspects of the system either. So that's what an exclusionary backup set allows you to do for a server operating system. Typically, it may be particular items that somebody may not want to actually back up. If there are other types of documents that you don't want to back up, or if there's a particular backup set that we have created that you want to exclude, you can do that too. All you need to do is right click on the backup set, and either if you want to remove that backup set, you can, or you can actually edit that to see the actual rules that make up that backup set. Okay, so if you needed to check what types of files are being selected, you can select that too there and check those. Okay, so that's just the backup sets in terms of adding a new backup set yourself, editing one, and creating an exclusionary rule. Okay, so as I mentioned a second ago there, in terms of the VSS, they're auto-populated here, and generally we would recommend using them for your larger systems like your Exchange, your Active Directory, and your SQL, because they'll just allow you to create easier backups for yourself of those systems. But also the real added advantage is in the restore process, because as I said, those systems actually have the restore wizards that will look to import these VSS backup sets to create the restore of the database, be it an Exchange one or an Active Directory one. You'll find additional information in terms of knowledge base articles in the support.mozy.com community around, or in the knowledge base section around the restore options with VSS backup sets, and specifically around Exchange and around Active Directory also. If you want to go ahead and add a network share, as I mentioned a while ago, you can do that from here in the File System tab. Okay, and here you'll have the option to add the network share. Okay, so if you click on Add Network Share, you'll be required to input the share name. Okay, so again, as you mentioned, you put in your // share name, and then /name. And if you have a username or password, you'll input that also, and then hit OK. Okay, it will look for the network share. Obviously, that's a made up name, so it won't actually find anything. But once, if it does, if the share is there, all that will happen is that it will get added here under my computer as another drive. Okay, so you'll see it as another drive, and you will just be able to access the files on there and select them for backup. The reasoning behind being able to use the server type user on a desktop operating system is because we are aware that some Mozy Pro users and some business users may have the scenario where they have a network share in the office, and this just allows them to back that network share up through one of maybe the desktop machines rather than through the server that you may have also. So that brings us to the bottom of the hour. Now I'm going to leave the remainder of the time open to any questions you may have on the content we've covered here and the walkthrough we've done. If there's anything you would like to ask, do pop it in the question box that you see on the right hand side of your screen. And if there's anything you would like me to recap on or go back over in terms of an explanation I gave, then please just let me know. For those of you who do not have any questions and you're happy enough with the session, again, thank you for joining us for this month's webinar. We will be back next month, again at the same time of the month, the last Wednesday of the month, and we will be sending out the recording of this training session once we have it hosted on our support webpage. Say for those who do not have any questions, thank you again for taking the time to attend today. And I will leave the remainder of the time open for any questions that you do have. Okay, well, there don't seems to be any questions being asked. Zach, you can cut it here. Actually, there's nobody on the session any longer. I'll just do a wrap up message in 5, 4. Okay, thanks everybody. That seems to be all the questions that were put forward. Again, thank you very much for taking the time to join us on this month's webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next month.